Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Soulful Abundance Festival. I'm your host, Elise Preston, founder of Be More Connected. And today I'm so thrilled to be here with the wonderful Karissa Raya. Welcome, Karissa.
Hi, welcome everyone. Thank you for having me, Elise.
Yes, you're so welcome. And Karissa is a first-generation Latinx Mexican-American daughter of immigrants, born and raised in Santa Ana, California. She supports families in documenting the beautiful milestones of life. And as a birth support person and a photographer, her purpose is to help people in keeping memories of their history. Karissa's intention with her camera is that her subjects, whether it be family, entrepreneurs, or a woman giving birth, that they feel seen. Photography is so much more than a single moment. Karissa considers herself to be a visual storyteller and historian. For the family she documents, she imagines generations from now, their family members looking upon the photos and telling stories, having so much gratitude that they have photos to keep their family history alive. And I'm so excited to be able to have this conversation with you today about this beautiful work that you do in the world, and also learning a bit more just about your own personal journey and your story. And so I would love to be able to start off by introducing our audience to you with a bit more depth and understanding more about your journey of healing and how you found your way to the work that you're doing in the world today.
Yeah, I feel like I went seeking in all places for the things that I wanted to do in life, and then really came full circle to the things that I always knew and loved to finally get here. And so I feel like the way that happened for me was I was always really curious and like understanding, the things that I loved and exploring like the existential questions of life. Like, I feel like I've always been that kid and that person, like, what is life? And
I relate.
Like, I've just always been that way. So I've always been, I feel like I was always super in tune and in touch, and very curious. I just didn't know really where to start, where to really take that learning and like all the things that I was interested in. I really didn't really know where to go. And so I feel like my interest was really increasing in my mid to late 20s. And then in there, I got pregnant with my first child, and that was intentional. We were like, let's have a baby. And then 2 weeks later, we were pregnant. And so that journey of being pregnant and that awareness, that like self-awareness and feeling, the changes in your body, and then the transition of motherhood, that's what really like was a catalyst, like really just pushed me forward so much in my own healing, because you become a whole new person. And so it was like going through grief. I didn't realize I was grieving, but I was grieving like the life that I no longer had, that like the life that I had built and developed up until becoming a mom, and then the life that like was anew. And so I grieved for a bit through like postpartum depression and anxiety, and really trying to step outside of myself, like be observant to the experience I was having, but still being present with like this tiny new person that I was caring for. And also the new person I was caring for within myself. Right. So that's when everything just like I was researching, you go down many rabbit holes when you're like learning and reading, and we have so much access on our phone or on our devices. I remember being a kid though, and like going through encyclopedias. So like, it's so different, the access we have. So like just being postpartum, and you have this like odd schedules with newborn. So like researching at all times of days, ordering books online, and just getting books and books and books. And I was interested in like herbalism and this idea of like, being your own healer, and really just like learning ways to vibrate higher and to be more self-aware and mindful. And so that's really where it stemmed, was in my early postpartum, like that first year postpartum, learning about caring for a child, but caring for my own, inner child and my own inner person and inner being. So motherhood for me was a huge catalyst. I think that I would have continued on that journey if I hadn't become a mother, but as catalysts do, they like increase the speed or rate, right, at which you're doing something.
Big
And so
time.
that's exactly what motherhood did for me. And that's what led me to birth work. I was like, this period, this transition is life altering. It's so change. And I used to think of it as being like a negative life alter. Like
Mm,
you became someone you didn't want to be anymore when you were a mom, like
yeah.
you lost this like youthful part of you, this like the woman who, could relate to other women that weren't moms in a way that once you become a mom, like you become unrelatable to them now. And so
Mm,
I used to see it as like a negative transformation. And then when I went through it, I was like, why is there not more support? Why is there not more nurturance to these people in transition?
yes.
All birthing people that are in that transition. And so that's what led me to birth work, is that I was just in my research, researching, and saw this Bay Area midwife was in LA, and she was like doing an intensive doula training, a POC only doula training. And I was like, that interests me. And so I
Yeah.
did that. And her training was incredible because she focuses a lot on the self. Like, how can you be of service to others if you yourself are not, doing the inner work?
Mm,
There's lots of like ego work in there and like shadow work. And so that was really, really beneficial for me to go through when I did, because we see now in this healing community is like everything is love and light, but what really needs to happen is that shadow, like deep root work. And so
yes.
I feel like her training was so ideal for me, because that's what we focused on, was like really working through that ego and shadow work so that you can best show up for people in their most intimate time of need, which is like in
Mm,
labor. So it was a full
yes.
spectrum birth work, doula training. And I was just sharing because I actually am part of her like sacred support team now.
Oh,
I work for
wow.
her now, and I took her training 3.5 years ago. And so I just told her, I was like, I'm still really integrating things I learned at your intensive training.
Right.
It's so much to take in
So rich.
that it's still like, even to this day, I'm like, oh, I remember I learned this, but now I'm like integrating it or researching more and bringing it more into my practice. So there's just so many pieces to that whole birth work world, because birth work is dynamic. It's not just birth. There's like loss support and postpartum support. There's so much there. But then to kind of go on a tangent there, what brought me to photography was also her training,
Oh, wow.
like working through all that inner work and really discovering, and her talking about like inner child and like things that we love. That
Mm.
really reminded me of like, I do really love photography. I actually photographed my training. I was a hobbyist. I was like, I have my camera and I just love taking pictures. So I took pictures of the whole training.
Oh, wow.
And so after her training, I was like, I could really marry these two loves that I
Together.
have, like of wanting to support this transition in birth and motherhood and parenthood and photography. And so that's how really they both came to life, about 3.5 years ago.
Yes. Ah, wow. This is so powerful. And I just really appreciate the way that you shared your story so openly and so vulnerably, and all of those different areas where you were able to be met with things that were like particularly, deep and confronting and challenging, and finding the opportunity for you to be like plugging into and connecting with opportunities for your own healing and expressing your gifts, and sharing them out in the world in new and creative and innovative ways. And the one piece that really stood out to me was, as you were describing that transition, um, to motherhood, and that a lot of the ways in which that transition is framed in society is framed as being something negative, and that naturally in our own experience, um, it can come with some of those aspects of grieving, past versions
Mhm.
of ourselves, or letting go or releasing connection to who we were maybe before giving birth. But that transition still gets to be something that is beautiful and exciting and inspiring. And in a minute, would love to be able to hear more about how you really shifted that whole lens and framework upon which you had understood or related to mothership, or I almost said mothership, motherhood.
It is a ship. It takes you.
It takes you, the mothership, how you'd related to motherhood in the past. And I also really loved that you emphasized that point of, postpartum, you're not just mothering your new little one, like new baby, that you're also tending to and caring for yourself as well, and your own inner child, and how complex and multidimensional that is to be able to hold both of those things.
Yeah.
And so I would love to hear a bit about that transition to motherhood for you, and just some of the ways in which your work as a birth support person has grown and expanded you.
That's a big one. I remember being postpartum and I took everything real conventionally. I wasn't in the birth world. I wasn't very connected to my own spiritualism prior to having my daughter. But after having her, that's when, like I said before, I just was researching and really connecting to these things that were really like a knowing within me, right? That intuitive knowing where these things feel like they feel right. And they feel like you've known them for a long time, but you've just uncovered them. So I felt like I did everything pretty conventionally. I had a hospital birth, but it was postpartum where I was like, they really don't tell you a lot. They really don't set you up for success, or they don't set your expectations. And so I remember reaching out. I remember this moment distinctly where I reached out to a friend who had a couple children. She were the same age, but she had, kids younger than I did. And I remember reaching out to her and saying to her, why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you ever share how hard this is? Or that you needed support, or that you were struggling? Because I knew that if I was feeling the way that I had, then other people surely must feel that way. And I had lots of support. It wasn't like I didn't have enough support. I had lots of support. I just felt like it wasn't spoken enough about. And I feel like the tides have changed. The culture is starting to change around the way we speak about birth and the way that we revere and hold birth culturally. We're talking about it more. We're talking about postpartum more. But, because she had children years before I did, it was different. And that's what she said. She's like, it was just different. We just didn't talk about it then. We just had to carry on and do it. And so through my own work as a doula, that's really what I work with clients is how can I, one, set your expectation to understand what could possibly happen, and two, also allow you and give you the tools to surrender. There's a sacred surrender. It's you want to be informed, you want to know what's happening, and you want to be consented. You want to give consent to whatever's happening to your body, but you also want to surrender to the whole experience. There's that's a fine balance, and it takes a lot of trust, of your own intuition and knowing, and also for the support that you have around you. You have to really trust and know that they have your best interest at hand. And so that's really how what my own journey has really informed my work as a doula, is really working through those a lot of mental blocks. I feel as a doula, my biggest priorities are a lot of the emotional aspects, and not necessarily, we talk about all the childbirth education and things like that, but it's mostly the inner workings of your mind as the birthing person, the person about to encounter this journey. How can we work through all of the roadblocks that are going to be in the way of your mind and your consciousness and your subconsciousness as you enter, this very difficult marathon. I always say that birth is a marathon, and we have to prepare our minds the way that we would our physical body for a marathon.
And that is such a powerful framing, because I think that we do think about birth as so much more of a physical process, and consider all of the different ways to prepare our body for that transition in that phase, but that on a mental and even like emotional and spiritual level, there is so much preparation that can happen during that time that I think is maybe not as highly prioritized or really focused on or brought to the surface in many mainstream conversations about birth. So I think that's so beautiful and transformational that that's welcomed in as such a large and important part of the birth work that you and others in connection with your tradition and your lineage are really emphasizing.
Yeah, absolutely. That's what's been affirmed for me time and time again. Every single experience I have with a birthing person is that mind-body connection, is that our body may know what to do, but our mind can really control, what's happening.
Yes. And so I'm really, so inspired by the way that you described your birth doula training being the catalyst, being the starting point for you also, reconnecting with this passion for photography. And would love to hear you speak a bit more about some of the ways that you are currently exploring photography, creativity, and capturing beautiful moments to support families with connecting in with each other and also having, something beautiful to be able to capture their family history.
Yeah. Photography has always been a modality that I really loved. I did it in high school, like as a darkroom photography. And even in college, I did darkroom photography for a few years. But even before then, my mom was a hobbyist. She always had her camera taking pictures of every moment. And I think that really stemmed from her not having pictures of herself as a child. She immigrated here from Mexico in her teens or her early teens. And I think I've seen one picture of her as a small child, and then just a couple of her, growing up. And so I think that she decided as an adult that I want to have pictures of my family. So every moment there was always a camera. She had cameras every time that she could take a picture of a family picture or us, we were always saying cheese. And we loved it at first until we were like teenagers and we were like, oh my gosh, come on, stop. Like that's enough.
Right.
So that happened until, I got my first job and my first paycheck, I bought my own camera. So I was like, okay, I see, I see that I really love photography now too.
Yes.
And so even through high school and then in college, in some like organizations I was in, I was like a historian at one point. I just took pictures. So I was the like organization's historian and I took pictures. And then it wasn't until, like I mentioned, after the doula training where I was like, why don't I do this professionally?
Yes.
Entrepreneurship has always called me. I just didn't know. I tried to do like products before. It wasn't my thing until, really that after birth transition, I was like, I think I'm more service-based. I started learning more about myself. I want to be of service. This is what I want to do. And that's when it clicked. It just clicked. I was like, I love photography. Why don't I do photography? So for the last few years, I've just been really reconnecting and, really learning so much about digital photography and reconnecting things that I learned in my youth about photography and really learning about myself, right? We're always learning about ourselves. Like we never cease to learn things about ourselves. And so what came up for me in this last year even is just that understanding and accepting and knowing that I'm just a creative person and I'm not just like a photographer or this or that. I just love to be creative and express myself creatively in whatever modality that seems fitting at the time. And photography for me is a really great way to express myself visually. I'm a very visual person. So I can express anything and everything in a photograph. If I needed to do that, I could take a picture to express and convey this artistically and creatively. I have a much harder time writing it down and using words. That's not necessarily my art. My art is like visuals and creating these visuals. So for me, it's like, I want to be I want to support other families and other individuals in keeping their own history and like having those mementos to keep forever.
Yes.
Because my mom took us to a portrait studio, like not JC Penney, but like another portrait studio that like just does portraits. So I remember as a kid like sitting in a little portrait studio and getting portraits taken. And so I'm like, we need to bring that back, but in a cool, creative way to get more pictures of ourselves. I have so many boxes under my bed and every closet of pictures that
Yes.
from time to time I look through, and I love that I have pictures of basically my whole life is like documented.
Yes. And how beautiful that you, in your own creative expression and how you are offering your gifts to the world, get to also be connected with something that was a beautiful thread that your mother really valued and instilled during your own childhood, that it gets to be something that, you're soaking in and integrating and carrying forward from your own mother.
Yeah.
And I really love that distilled down this aspect of your own being in terms of saying, I am just a creative person, and this is how I want to be channeling my energy into the world. And through that process of learning about yourself and trying out different things, testing out, experimenting, you were able to feel into what are the forms of entrepreneurship that aren't really landing for me, aren't feeling so good, aren't yielding me the results that I want. And, that's important feedback. It's important redirection towards then that moment where you were like, I'm more of a service-based person. This just clicks, this flows, this works for me. And I think being able to hear stories like yours can be so supportive for our audience, because sometimes we get discouraged if something doesn't work the first time and think that maybe we're not cut out for entrepreneurship or it's not for us. And what that really is a reflection of is just that style, that way, that approach maybe wasn't right for you, but there's an infinite other ways, possibilities to be able to tap into. And how can you get to know yourself better, as you were describing, really get to know yourself so deeply so that you know and can really tap into your intuition to be able to assess what is clicking, what is working, what feels supportive for you.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I would love to be able to hear a bit about the ways in which community informs the work that you do.
Community for me is so big because there's so much regional history and history within the people, that live in certain communities. But before I even get there, I would say that like one of my favorite, what I like to say that my favorite thing about motherhood is like comadrehood, like the friendships. There's like a term in Spanish called comadre, and it's like it sounds like co-mother, but it's basically that endearing term that you would call like a mother friend. Yes. And so that's what's been my biggest thing about motherhood, aside from, motherhood itself. It's great, but making these connections with other moms is what's been really healing for me and what's allowed me to just like have that support and community and be able to like come to someone and be like, I have these ideas or I have these dreams and wishes, and be able to like share them and like really work through them together and manifest together. That's been really beautiful. And then translating it into work is that, we're all local in this local community. And so there's projects that I'm doing with a local community. Like there's one in my city, actually, I'm just starting, and it's called This is Santa Ana. And then there'll be a different theme. So like This is Santa Ana families or porch portraits. I did porch portraits last year when everything was shut down. I went around the city and just took portraits of families on their porch. And so we're going to be displaying them because there's an arts focus in our downtown area. We're going to be having like an outdoor gallery of like the porch portraits next month. And so then eventually it'll be different things. Like This is Santa Ana, and I want to do one where it's like This is Santa Ana elders, and then we just take portraits of elders. This is Santa Ana, entrepreneurs, and just take pictures of entrepreneurs, and then being able to tell their story through their portrait, and also have them have a portrait of themselves. There are so many entrepreneurs that don't have pictures of themselves, or, only have, a selfie, or they just haven't had the means to get a photographer, or whatever the case might be. Right. And so it's like bringing portraiture to everybody and anybody that could be in front of the camera. So I pop up also in our community for community portraits, where I just pop up at local restaurants or patios or communal eateries and things like that. And if they're willing to let me just pop up, I just pop up as a community portrait photographer, and then anybody can come and have a seat. It's almost like a photo booth, but they're getting like a high quality like picture. It's like a full size picture. It's not just like a very, quick print. It's like they're getting a full size digital picture that they can use like on their website, on their LinkedIn, on their, sometimes work needs like a picture, or just like a picture to have.
Yes. Oh, and I love this this value that you're really expressing right now around accessibility and community access. And this concept of pop-up portraits, it feels very new to me. Like, I don't really hear about other people doing that kind of work with photography. And so it feels so exciting to be able to hear your story and just hear about, as you said, you're a creative person doing things in new and creative ways. And I think that this also really connects to, this level of generosity and sharing and community really deeply connects in with the themes of this series. And so want to start to bring our conversation to a close by asking you the question that I ask all of our guests, which is, what does soulful abundance mean to you?
Soulful abundance to me just means being like fully held in like all your needs being met, just like feeling like I don't need anything. Everything is so abundant, and I feel like my needs are met, my community is held, and I just feel like nurtured. Like what I'm seeing is just like hands just kind of like holding, and you just can kind of float on the waters of like abundance.
Ooh, floating on the waters of abundance. I love that.
Like it just feels like ease, like that soulful abundance when you just like can, you ever like float on the water and you're just like, things are great. I'm just like floating on the water. I have no worry. Everything is good.
Beautiful. And wondering if there's any other final messages or final words that you would like to share with our audience.
I would just say that take a moment to just like capture, your everyday life. I love capturing mundane moments because they are so abundant. We have an overabundance of mundane moments. But the more that we like take pictures of them or even capture videos of them, like there's just so much lusciousness that comes from watching these memories. I watch these like mundane little moments of, us cleaning up toys. I've taken a video or something of my daughter when she was little. And so now I have these like little videos of her being so small, moving, and the way that she moved and the way that she sounded. Like it was mundane in the moment. It was so mundane. Sure. But now it's like so precious to me.
Yes. Oh, I think that's such a sweet note to wrap on. Finding the preciousness and the lusciousness in the mundane. And so I know our audience is going to be so excited about finding out different ways to stay connected with you. And so if you could share that info with us now, that would be amazing.
So if you go to do you want my main Instagram or my like business one?
I would say you can share both.
Both. Okay. Yeah. So if you go to my business Instagram, it's called Olive La Vida, OLIVELAVIDA, Olive La Vida. You can find my main page there. So that's like my business one where I post lots of my work and what I'm working on at the time. And then my main page is Karissa M. Raya, where I post my life and kind of the things that I'm working through. A lot of the thoughts that I shared here today, like I just kind of like whatever I'm feeling, whatever thoughts I'm moving through, that's where I share that.
Yes. And so so grateful that you joined us for this conversation today, and really just appreciate the warm energy, the beautiful way with which you share your own story and offer such groundedness and rootedness in our journey and our process, which can often like come with a lot of trials and twists and turns and can be very nonlinear. And I feel as though your story offered just some beautiful support for people in our audience who identify as leaders and visionaries and change makers, and can oftentimes feel like it's important to have, you know, every piece mapped out and have a lot of control over how that process goes. But I love that you reminded us, you know, in the birth process, but also just in life, right? To embrace so much of that trust and surrender. And that's what really supports us with being able to move in the directions that we're seeking to go. So thank you again for sharing your time and your wisdom. And for everyone tuning in, thank you so much for joining us. And I look forward to seeing you again tomorrow for our next set of interviews. Be well, everyone.